It has long been my belief that there's more going on with Quadratum than we might think. Whilst many people have often held the opinion that Quadratum is this singular place with one constant state, ever since Remind there has been evidence to suggest otherwise, and now with the reveal of Kingdom Hearts 4, this has become even clearer. In my theory video I did on Yuzora vs Sora, I was trying to understand the reason for some of the inconsistencies we saw between the Remind endings and the original secret ending of Kingdom Hearts 3. And now there are even more inconsistencies to delve into because it's quite clear that there's more than one face to the city of Quadratum. Quadratum, or well, Unreality as we've seen it, has two completely different faces. To explain exactly what I mean by this, I'm going to go over all the instances that we've seen of the city. Our very first look at Quadratum was when we went to Toy Box and we were immediately hit with that amazing Virum Rex commercial. The next time was during the secret ending of Kingdom Hearts 3, and wait, hold on a moment. This was in fact the second time we ever saw Quadratum. This was when young Xehanort flung Sora into what appears to be some sort of data version of the Virum Rex video game, the setting of which is an oil rig in what would usually be called the Tokyo Bay area, but in this case I guess it'd be called the Quadratum Bay area, and in order to escape we had to fight through an onslaught of Gigases, and whilst we can return back there whenever we want to play through the Beat of Lead minigame, there's no other story to be found there. The very next time we saw Quadratum was indeed the secret ending, where we saw both Sora and Riku there, although in different districts, with Sora being in Shibuya and Riku being in Shinjuku. Then again in Remind when Yuzora and Sora fight, and then again in both endings of that fight when Yuzora is in the car, and then of course finally in Kingdom Hearts 4. Now perhaps you've already noticed some of the discrepancies. It appears that there are possibly 3 different versions of Quadratum that we've seen so far. The data version, the dream version, and what I'm calling the true version. I've named the data version as such because, as I've already mentioned, it appears that the place the Beat of Lead minigame takes place in is a data world, which would explain why it's so easily accessible. If it were really Quadratum, then it wouldn't be possible to get in and out quite so simply. Now regarding the dream version, I believe this is connected to the final world in Yuzora's dreams. It explains why Sora's Dive to Heart could be summoned, as Dive to Hearts are only ever seen appearing in either dreams or data, and in the secret ending when Riku was seen there, this was because of him diving into Sora's dreams. Also, I'm including the Virum Rex commercial in it because although it's advertising a video game, I think it's very likely that what it shows us is actually based on true events. However, there's some other reasons that make this particular version odd when it's related to what I've called the true version, and the reason why the third one is called the true version is because from as far as I can tell, this is the real world, the real Quadratum, at least from what Yuzora says when he says this isn't the real world, but yet we see him wake up in his car to what I would assume is the real world. However, there's some other reasons that make the dream version particularly odd when it's related to what I've called the true version. See, after that fight, Yuzora wakes up in his car, and this is where we first see the true version of Quadratum. Notice that this version is also in the daytime, just like the same true version we see in the Kingdom Hearts 4 trailer. In all the other instances, the city has been beneath a night sky, but the differences aren't limited to just different times of day. In all the night versions of Quadratum, both Data and Dream, the city is completely empty. Of course, in the Data version, we can't run around, but the fact that we're just fighting on an oil rig in the Tokyo Bay area is a little peculiar if the city was operating as normally as it seems to be in the true version. And besides, this data version seems far more similar to the dream version, which is again also empty. Now, since the data version seems to simply be a video game based on either one of or both the other versions, I'm going to set it aside for this video because besides the time we're thrown into it, it doesn't really have any clear importance to what I want to discuss. Now, when looking at the dream version of Quadratum, however, there's something that has to be immediately noted about the emptiness, and that's that it's not truly empty. Again, since I'm including the Virum Rex commercial as part of the dream version, we can clearly see there's a whole host of Gigases, Yuzora and his allies, and the nameless woman who is almost certainly the nameless star. Now, based on what we've seen of the true Quadratum, this entire commercial becomes somewhat questionable. The Gigas mechs that we see are clearly some sort of high tech. The abilities Yuzora and his allies use, they also appear to be high tech, and I'm guessing it's purely technical rather than magical, but of course, we don't know for certain. And then there's the nameless star, who is projecting this strange beam, but why she's projecting it is unclear. But it has always seemed to me like the Gigases weren't trying to stop her, but rather defend her, perhaps forcing her to project the beam for some purpose. Now, the main thing to note though, is just the level of technology and the power that's on display here. And again, where the heck are all the civilians? In the Kingdom Hearts 4 trailer, we not only see that the city is populated, but Streletsia herself outright says the world is full of life, except in the versions of Quadratum that I believe are the dream versions, that's obviously not the case. When the dark side appears, the citizens seem to be in shock, and their only reaction is to run away. This dude right here clearly illustrates that they don't know what's going on, because we see he's got his phone out recording, likely so he can just post his reaction and breakdown video later on. But the point is, it strongly suggests this is their first time seeing anything like that. Now, given how similar this true version of Quadratum seems to be to the real world, and the fact that the citizens don't seem to know what to make of this new dark invader, it makes me wonder if Unreality is even capable of handling this type of threat yet. If you look at the commercial and the Yozora fight, I'm sure he and his friends can easily handle a dark side, especially given how difficult of a fight Yozora was just by himself. And even without them, the Gigases surely could squad up to handle a dark side. But the fact that Sora had to come running in does make me wonder whether or not this sort of tech or power even exists in the true Quadratum. Now, this line of thinking leads to some very interesting possibilities. Let's say that it does. Then perhaps the military simply hadn't responded immediately, and it's fair to assume there is a military force in Quadratum, because in the other instance of us seeing the true version, Yozora is called Commander by his driver. Commander. So where was the commander? Yozora was nowhere to be seen in that trailer, which is extremely suspicious. Surely he would have come running in to protect his people against an unknown threat. But he didn't. Again though, perhaps he would appear later. Since it is early trailer footage, it's probably too early to call on how the military response would work, but that's just assuming that there would be one that's even adequate. If so, I'd imagine they'd be sending in Gigases and maybe Yozora or something along those lines. However, let's consider the very interesting alternative. What if this technology doesn't exist in the true Quadratum? Firstly, this means that the dream version is showing us abilities and powers that aren't actually a reality for Yozora, which could work given the fact it's a dream. So that's easily explainable. The same for the commercial, and even more so because it's advertising a video game, which could easily mean it's not entirely real. Although this still becomes very questionable, because we can assume that what happens in the commercial has some relevance to what really happens to Yozora, because the Nameless Star says someone took away her form and identity, and in the commercial we see Yozora hasn't managed to save her as she's snatched away by a Gigas, implying that something did indeed happen to her. It's just unknown whether or not the events in this commercial are directly linked to it, because it doesn't seem like we've seen how she lost her form yet. So even if the commercial is more related to the dream version we've seen and is showing fictional powers, it doesn't explain why that dream version has seemingly had real consequences, since we were actually able to meet the Nameless Star. But then again, we met her in the final world, and the final world is connected to dreams.
Oh, you forget? There are 3 people who hold the key. There's still one more. One with a strong will and a very precious dream.
So who else have we seen from this nighttime dream version and also in the true version besides Yozora? The Master of Masters. In the secret ending, he's here in the empty night sky city, but in the Kingdom Hearts 4 trailer, it seems he's also there as well. But this makes me wonder, how exactly are these 2 different versions connected, and what details from the dream version are based on the real version? Is the Nameless Star an actual person in the real version, or is she simply from Yozora's dreams? The same question for the Gigases and Yozora's friends. Why is it we see them with him in the commercial but never again beyond that? And what exactly is this commercial even depicting? Is it real events from Yozora's life? Or like most video games, is this more fantastical and fictitious? Remember, we're all saying that this is like Versus 13, and the slogan for Versus 13 was a fantasy based on reality. So does that phrase have any application here? If so, how much of what we've seen in the commercial and the fight against Yozora in Remind is fantasy, and how much of it is reality?
I've been having these weird thoughts lately. Like, is any of this for real or not? None of this makes sense to me.
I personally think everything we've seen so far of the nighttime Quadratum takes place in the dream version, meaning all those events are somehow linked, or at least take place in the same realm, whereas the Quadratum that Yozora and Sora both wake up to has its own events that are running parallel to all of this, which is why Yuzora says he accidentally wandered into this place and then he went through some trials. And he distinctly points out that this isn't the real world, yet he is really there. My video on who told Yuzora to save Sora was where I first pointed this out and went into more detail about it. What I'm describing here about a dream quadratum and a real quadratum, this might slightly be reminding you of Dream Drop Distance, where for example we had the dream version of Traverse Town and all of the dream worlds, but there was also of course the actual Traverse Town. And it should be reminding you of that, because it's been my belief for a while now that something along those lines is going on here, especially because again, Riku's appearance in Quadratum was him diving into Sora's dreams, and we know he's Sora's Dream Eater. And now there's also the fact that there's these two signs in the Kingdom Hearts 4 trailer. Now the one on the left that says D Eater is almost certainly a reference to Dream Eaters, and as if to confirm it, the sign next to it says D Dream. So something with dreams is certainly going on here. Also, I can't mention those two signs and not point out the Fabula Book sign as well just above it. Not sure what the implication is of that, but it's something worth noting. Now this is all very confusing as you might imagine, and perhaps it's too early to really make any solid conclusions. However, as I said at the start, I've long believed that Quadratum has at least two faces, one in the form of dreams and another in the waking world. And the fact that the Kingdom Hearts 4 trailer has confirmed that the city is in fact full of life just lends itself even more so to this being the case. Whether I'm correct on the commercial being connected to the dream version or not is something we're gonna have to find out, but it does make me really wonder who made this Virum Rex commercial and why is it in the form of a video game if these are true events? Because if they are true events, then when do they take place? Because it can't possibly be before Kingdom Hearts 4, judging by the state of things. But then that leads to my final thoughts on this. Is it possible that all those events we've seen of the Dream Quadratum are actually a direct consequence of what happens in the Kingdom Hearts 4 trailer? In other words, is Sora and the darkness that's arrived alongside him in this world the true reason for all of the conflict that we've seen in Quadratum? Well, that's a question for another time. Once again, I'm diving straight into the confusion. You know, I could have really just picked a much simpler topic to discuss, but no, I just had to go right for the mindfuckery, didn't I? Now, it's been over 10 months since I released my last actual theory video. I do hope that this video was thought-provoking and inspired some new ideas for your own theories, whatever they are, and I'd love to hear about them in the comments. Now, as you can imagine, there's still a good amount that I want to discuss, such as Locksword's legacy, the Seed of Light, this other cloaked figure, and even boss fights. So expect to see more on all of that in the coming days, although hopefully they won't all be quite as confusing. Until then, my name is NextGenNovelist, and that's all I've got to say, and I'm out. Peace.